Okay, this is task 14. Now, I already said right at the beginning of this course what an incredible privilege it is to be able to choose when sounds stop and when sounds start. But so far, we've only really looked at some very basic rhythmic devices, and particularly the durations, so things like crotchets and quavers and semiquavers. This time, we're going to look at advanced rhythmic devices. This is where all these things will help to create even more detail and as to choose lengths of notes or rests that have a much more detailed value. It also helps us to affect the flow without changing the tempo. It helps us to create a signal or a way to communicate to other parts. It helps us to vary the energy of the music, to create complexity, to create variety, and many, many other different things. So let's create some examples for each of these. So dotted notes. A dot written after a note adds half its value again. A double dot adds half the value and then half the value again. So this is what one of those looks like. If I just zoom in. First of all, if I draw the box that we had before, that was how we understood how semiquavers and quavers fitted into one beat. So these four squares represent one beat. So each of the boxes is worth a quarter beat. If I draw, this is going to be a dotted quaver. I haven't quite finished it yet. You've got to remember when you're writing these dotted rhythms, there's always two parts to it. There's the bit with a dot on it, and you notice the dot comes after the note. And then there's another part to it that's always a shorter note that makes the value up to either one beat or two beats, as we'll see as we go along. So this is an example of a dotted rhythm. So I've got a dotted quaver and a semiquaver. And whereas if I filled all those boxes up, it would create the Coca-Cola rhythm, instead, I would just make my sound on the first and the fourth. Because if this first note here was half a beat long, then it would cover the first two boxes in the four. But the dot adds half the value again. So instead of covering two boxes, it covers three boxes. And that's why that note lasts for this length, and we've just got a quarter left. It's helpful, as we know in music, to be able to read things in groups of a beat or a whole number of beats. So that's why that little note's really, really important. And actually, you can't really hear the dotted nature of the rhythm until you add that second part as well. A double dotted one works in very much the same way, except I would have to draw 8 boxes at the bottom here. Let's do that anyway. So the double dotted means that this note lasts for 7 of the eighths, and so we need a note at the end that's an eighth long, which is a demi-semiquaver. So the dotted nature of that rhythm is much, you'd use it as maybe as an effect or a real feature. You wouldn't use it very often. This one here is used very often in music, but the double dotted less so. But if you understand what it means, then that gives you an option for the future. Let's have a look at some other rhythmic values that have dots after them. So for example, you might choose to draw a dotted crotchet. Obviously that note is more than a beat long, so it wouldn't fit into one of those charts that like I've drawn at the bottom of the box there. However, you can make it up to a 2-beat rhythm by just adding a quaver. So we've got a 1.5 beat followed by a half beat, so it adds up to this whole number of 2. Let's do a different one. So we've got a dotted minim. A minim on its own would be worth 2, so we add half the value again and makes it worth 3. So if you're working in a bar of 4/4, the way to make it up to the whole number, or well, I suppose it's already a whole number, but the way to make it up to kind of a whole group is you add the crotchet at the end there. Okay, so that's dotted notes. Triplets are 3 notes played in the time of 2. Most frequently, triplet quavers are used. but it's possible to write triplets of other durations such as crotchets or minims. If we have two quavers drawn like that, they last for one beat. Another group that lasts for one beat is three triplet quavers, and the important thing is to add the number 3 at the top, because otherwise we'd just have this really strange looking group of 3 quavers, and that's how you draw them. In the same way that we say coffee, 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 coffee to understand how the quavers fit, to understand how the triplet quavers fit, I say triplety. So we get triplety, triplety, triplety. If you listen carefully to that, you can hear that each of those notes becomes a third of a beat long. Let's move on. A Scotch snap. Now this is frequently found in folk music. A Scotch snap is like a dotted note group, but it's reversed with the shorter note being played first. And that's exactly what it is. So if I draw this again, so it looks like the note should be in the same place, but because the shorter note is here and the dot is here, actually, in reality, we'll hear the two notes there and there. So perhaps it would be more helpful to draw it like this. Syncopation, a rhythm that features a note or notes on the offbeat. Now, a key word in this is features. So if we come across here, imagine I'm working in 4/4. These are the beats of the bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, instead of giving you the beats, I'm going to give you the quavers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's still 4 beats in the bar, but there's 8 quaver beats in the bar. Now I'm going to write this rhythm. I'm going to have the first 2 quavers there, then I'm going to have a quaver rest, and a quaver on its own, then a quaver rest, quaver on its own, and then 2 quavers together. This rhythm sounds like this. Count the quavers and clap the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If we'd have counted this as crotchet beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, we'd say that on beats 2 and 3 there's a rest, so that removes the strength of the beat, the strength of the pulse away from the beat, because those are rests on beats 2 and 3. This note in the middle here, we've created a feature of it, and we've created a feature of it being not on a beat, or being on what we call the offbeat. To create a feature of something, we put a rest either side, like we have there. So listen to the rhythm without me counting. It has a change in energy, and syncopation is often used to add energy to music. Next one, Anachrosis, the start of a rhythm that begins before the first beat of the first full bar of music. Okay, let's imagine this time we're working in 3/4, and this is a rhythm. But in the first bar, I'm not going to use the whole bar, because I want almost like a pickup into the first whole bar to almost establish a sense of flow before I get there. And you get this in a lot of very lyrical music, songs and things. And what you often find with Anachrosis is the rhythm before that first bar begins is then repeated, and that kind of continues the flow of the music, which is really clever. We might change the rhythm later on. Okay, but the Anachrosis is this bit. That's the most important thing. If you're learning about what an Anachrosis is, it's that bit at the beginning where the first bar is less than a full bar long. Next one, ostinato, a rhythm that repeats over and over again. So it's exactly what it says. whatever's in that first bar, we just copy it. And we keep going and keep going and keep going. And it will feel like it goes round and round and round and round again. Okay, augmentation, lengthening, often doubling the durations of all the notes in a phrase. So here's an example. If we have crotchet, crotchet, minim, so that makes up to 4 beats. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to double each length. So a crotchet doubled is a minim. The next crotchet is a minim. Now I've run out of space in the next bar, so there's another bar line. But the last note of that first bar, this one here, is 2 beats to start with, so we're going to make that 4 beats. So we draw a semi-brief, and there we go. Let's do the next one, diminution. Opposite of augmentation, shortening, often halving the durations of all the notes in a phrase. So here we go. Let's go in 4/4 again. This time I'm going to start with 4 crotchets. So there's my bar line because I finished my first 4 beats. So I'm now going to halve the value of those. 2, 3, 4. I'm actually going to beam them all together as a group of 4 quavers this time. Okay, now I've only used up 2 beats within that second bar, so I'm now going to halve them again. And to halve those, I have another group, but this time they're semiquavers. So let's think about how many beats I've used in that bar so far. Well, I've used 1, 2, 3, so I've still got another beat left. So I have got room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, to draw 8 demi-semiquavers. 1, 2, 3. You notice I've just beamed them once all the way across the top. Can make it slightly easier to read. There we go. So these 2 ways of writing out swung quavers. We could write them as normal quavers. Often jazz music might be written like this, and then all they do at the top is the right swing. And that just tells the performer the style that those quavers are to be played. So the straight quavers sound like this. And swung quavers sound like this. So there's a real difference there. Now the other way to write them is, and sometimes you see at the top of the music, it'll be written like this. So you'll have 2 quavers equals crotchet, quaver, which has a bracket around it with a number 3. So it's a bit like a triplet from what we learned above. If you were to write out that rhythm, it would take you ages and ages and ages and ages if you had to do it for every beat, because there's so many little bits and pieces to draw out for that section. So often that's why it's not written like that, and it's written like this. I've also seen swing rhythms written like this. As you find out when you start using the dotted rhythms above, really a dotted rhythm is nothing like a swung rhythm. And the important thing to remember all the time is there's varying levels of swing from light to heavy. It very much is about the live performance. So this is just about there being enough to communicate to the musicians the intention of the composer. Polyrhythm. Now polyrhythm literally means 2 or more different rhythms played together. So here's an example. Again, I'll go in 4/4. Imagine there's actually 2 staves, one above the other here. So if we were to write tea, coffee, tea, tea, and then underneath, now I'm looking for rhythms that complement each other. So I'm looking for where the gaps appear in between the rhythms to make sure that they'll work well together without just getting in each other's way. So I'm going to use a dotted crotchet there, because we've now learnt about that. So that means the quaver to make it up to 2 beats will be in between those 2, and then they can finish together. So that's a polyrhythm. That's an example of a polyrhythm. A cross rhythm is slightly more complicated, and definitely adds a sense of complexity. It's actually quite a lot more complicated to play as well. So if we wrote the first rhythm in 6/8, if you imagine 6/8 means 6 quaver beats in a bar. So here are the quaver beats: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then underneath, I'll write 3, 4. So 3 crotchet beats in a bar. Well, I've still got 6 quavers in a bar of 3, 4. But you would count generally the 6/8 bar in 2. It's a 2-time meter. So 2-time being 2 dotted crotchets. So 1, 2, 1, 2. But equally in 3, 4, so using the same number of quaver beats, I could have 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and because I've gone across between 2 meters, that's what a cross rhythm is. So it's where you have 2 pulses that are playing together. Now, a hemiola is a very clever rhythmic device because it creates a temporary feel of 2-time within a 3-time rhythm. So it's often found in Baroque music and often in dances. It prevents the constant pulse from feeling the same throughout. In other words, it helps you to almost have a sense of a change of tempo without actually changing the tempo. So really, really clever. Here's an example of a hemiola. So I'll write in 3, 4, and we'll start off with 3 crotchet beats. There's our bar line, and in the next bar we'll have 3 crotchet beats. Third bar we'll have a crotchet and a minim. So in the first bar there, it's very definitely in 3-time. The second bar looks like it's going to be 2, but I'm going to add this. And that line there, that curve, is called a tie, which is another rhythmic device. And what that allows you to do is when you haven't got enough beats left in a bar, it means that you can connect them together to notes in the following bar. So you'll only play it at once at the beginning of the note. So you play the note here, but instead of playing the next note as well, you'll just hold it down for the length. And what that does is you get a sense of 3-time, then you get a sense of 2-time, 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 just there. Okay, and then maybe you'd finish the phrase with a dotted minim, which is 3 again. So that's an example of a hemiola where it feels like it changes from 3-time to 2-time to 3-time. So a temporary change that will feel like a change of tempo, but without actually changing the tempo. A pause, a moment in the music where the performer is instructed to hold a note for longer than the written duration. Often the duration is doubled. Used to create tension or to signal that a section has come to an end, perhaps before moving on into a different tempo or following a writ. A writ in tempo is where we gradually slow down. So I'm just going to show you how a pause is written. It's very simple. So if this is your final note in your phrase or the note you want your pause on, draw the minim or whatever value note it is, and then over the top it's just an arc with a dot in it, and that's a pause. And finally we've got a drum kit fill. So I'm going to draw this in 4/4, and you might have never written out music for drums before, so this will be interesting in other ways as well. So these crosses at the top, whenever you see crosses in drum music, it means that these are to be played on the cymbals, because you change the note head from a dot to a cross. So this could be written for hi-hat, or it could be written for ride cymbal. So let's just carry on these through. It's a little bit fiddly in this box. Okay, and then underneath, on beat 1, I'm going to play a bass drum. Beat 2, a snare. Beat 1, a bass drum. Beat 2, a snare. This is like a pop beat on a drum kit. And I'm going to add a fill in at the end. So this is a musical signal that a phrase or section of a song is ending and a new section is about to begin. Often played using the snare drum and tom-toms and ending with a bass drum and crash played together on beat 1 of the new section or phrase. So we'll write that in a moment. Coffee. lemonade. And the reason I've changed how high or low these notes are is to represent, so this one here would be the snare drum, and this would be a tom-tom. And you could put these other notes on different lines to represent the high, mid or low toms. Okay, but that is essentially what a fill-in looks like on the music. And then what we said in the next, on beat 1 of the next bar, to complete the fill-in, if you like, it's almost like a full stop at the end of that statement, is you would draw a crash that's extended often. You can like draw a minim, but with the cross note head in the middle of it, and then the bass drum at the bottom.